Hey there, restorers. Welcome to a brand new episode, the first one of 2025 of Phil and Michelle's Happy Hour. We have had a very long hiatus, longer than I think we anticipated. So we're going to do better in 2025. And I'm more saying that for me than Phil needs to say it because he's been far more on top of this than I have. So I am excited that we keep moving the train forward. And first guest of the year is somebody fabulous from the industry, Tom McGuire with Large Loss Mastery. So Phil, kind of welcome in,
Fabulous.
and then I'll let you toss it over to Tom.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, for putting this together. And um, I'll start with some of my premise. And just we do this every time, but when it's a long time in between them, a reminder. We call this Phil and Michelle's Happy Hour because it's based around concepts that maybe we'd have at a conference that would take place at the bar after hours. And it's not crazy stuff about outrageous stories. That's where I learned most of my great lesson, not most, many of my great lessons in restoration is talking to people about real world problems, getting to know who they are and getting their perspective on the industry and their business, and then my business in turn because of that. So that's the premise behind what we're doing here. And so really, really happy to see Tom, to learn a little bit more about what he's doing, because Tom's always around, but he's that quiet guy in the back of the room or walking through the hall. And if you haven't been to his classes, it's easy to kind of look by him. And I think that that's a mistake. So let's get to know Tom a little bit here and learn how he's relevant in the industry and relevant to your business. So with that, Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then in that, give us a little bit of story where you came from in this restoration world. So you weren't always at Large Loss Mastery, and you weren't always the guru giving answers to great restoration challenges. So walk us through this transition process.
Well, and again, I'm Tom McGuire. I started in uh, May of 1986 in restoration. And I was working for a company called MF Bank, the restoration company. And at the time, we, and most people, and I think the younger generation needs to understand it, this business that we are in it was really born in 1980. So it's very young. And in the 80s, it was completely different than what it is now. So in 1986, we were 10 years, oops, sorry. We were 10 years away from IRCRC, any drying standards or any of that kind of stuff in 1986. 1995, 92 through 95 is where IRC started taking a strong hold in restoration. Prior to that, IRCRC was where you went to get your more of your carpet cleaning and extraction and those things. So the restoration industry was very young, and at the time, before I got into the restoration, I was doing asbestos abatement while I was in college, and the back before mold was gold, it was asbestos, and the asbestos world back then, if you can imagine, every government building had to have asbestos removed, and so every school, every government building, so hundreds of thousands of buildings. And so asbestos compared to the mold deal was enormous. And so that's what I was doing during school. I would work during the summertime. And at the time, this was 1985, 86, 87. And and I was working, and I would make enough money over the summer to pay for my school. And so I didn't have to work for the whole year. And so, back then it took a whole lot less. I couldn't do that now because, life is expensive. And, and back then, you could live on $200 very easily. And so, but I was also making, $25 an hour, in 1984 with overtime. So we were working 12 hours a day. It was a crazy job. And I was always really good at project management. And so the guys that were some of the guys that I was working with, they were older. They were in their late 20s and 30s, and they were leaving to go to work for this company called MF Bank, the restoration company, doing fire and water restoration. And they said, Tom, you got to come over. It's unbelievable. And I was like, fire and water restoration? What are we talking about? Because back then, as far as large loss, there were like two companies that did large loss world go on a national basis. And because of that, it
So
took,
that was Munters. Yeah, that was Munters, and who was the other
well,
one?
it was prior to Munters. And so
Oh,
this was MF Bank and BMS Cat.
Oh.
And
oh,
then
okay, yeah.
there were some larger, because MF Bank, the restoration company, was an offshoot of BMS Cat. And BMS Cat is really the granddaddy of large loss in our industry. And because back in the 80s when I joined in, everything and everybody came out of Texas. All of the large projects were all done by crews that came out of Texas. And that's why Texas, even today, is a stronghold within our industry. There's still a lot of guys and gals that come from Texas that are in the restoration world, because that's really because where it all started. And so they talked me out of school, and so next thing I knew, I was in Dallas, Texas, and I had a Kim sponge in my hand, Kim sponge or a dry rubber sponge, cleaning a wall, and I was like going, what did I do? Here I'm in this factory with metal walls in the middle of Texas, Dallas,
Oh.
cleaning a wall with a sponge. And so, but the one thing about our industry, we could go out on a fire job right now. And what are we going to see? We're going to see somebody cleaning a wall with a dry sponge and, a Unger pole, maybe, we're still doing the same thing that we were doing. We just have better direction.
Yep.
And back then we didn't have rules. We didn't really have training. Your training was on the job. Your training was, you showed up, they called you, told you where the job was, you showed up, somebody told you what to do, and then you did it. And so all of the standards that we have today were born out of that learning on the job. Both good and bad, because there's some things that that we wouldn't ever do again, and chemicals that you can't ever use again, because some of the chemicals that we were using back then are now banned, because they cause cancer and all kinds of other stuff. So I have allergies almost on a daily basis, all year round. And the only thing you can do is just deal with it. And so I think that's where they came from, but I'm not sure. And so that's how I got involved in the industry. And so after cleaning that wall with the Kim sponge, I was pretty much been here ever since. It's been, I think, 38 years, 39 years. It doesn't matter once you go past 30.
Yeah. Yeah, you got me by a few. It's interesting to be a part of the industry starting in let's just say in the 80s, because I started a couple years after you. But you get to see this evolution from the very beginning, when we're doing everything on pencil and paper, and you have to think about the process versus sitting down and having a computer telling you what to do, or you have some training manual that walks you through it. So that learning process, it gets refined because there's those tools, but you have to know the premise behind it. And I think that's really valuable. So you were working with all these companies, and then did you ever have your own company, or were you just always working with this kind of the larger players in various situations?
I was always in with the larger companies and back with MF Bank, because back then no one was doing large loss restoration. It was BMS Cat and
Yep.
MF Bank. And so we were in Kuwait, Singapore. Uh, I've done projects in Costa Rica, also outside of MF Bank, but and so they were taking us all over because there weren't that many companies doing,
Mm.
what we were doing, and it was also a different world. So it was that world where uh, I want to say I call it the hero phase of our business,
Hmm.
and so because and what I mean by that is we used to look at we used to be looked at the restorer was looked at as somewhat of a hero because we were saving people money, and that was the number one thing. And then one thing that has changed over the years is, and we kind of shot ourselves in the foot, but the market was so much smaller then. Like, for example, a big company, a big large loss company was, 30 million. And now, the market
Hmm.
is so huge that and no one would have foreseen it. If I were to compare it to something, it would be like almost what is currently in Australia, where most of the
Hmm.
work in Australia is done by general contractors,
Hmm.
and the restorers are slowly breaking in. They're getting work, but they're kind of in that phase where we were at the very beginning. And so it was
Hmm.
interesting going over to Australia and spending time there with everybody there. Great restorers. They've got a great future over there, and so that's exciting. Um, but there's a lot of things that that it's just changed so much, and you have more people involved. There were no TPAs or none of this stuff that we have now, and everything was time and materials. You put together your estimate, your scope, your budget number, and this is what it was going to be, and the foundation of where we are now.
Hmm. Okay, so Phil and
So
I,
as I oh,
go ahead.
go ahead, Michelle. Yeah. I was
Okay,
just going to say to my friends in Australia, I went there a couple years ago, probably 5, 6 years ago, and I did a workshop because I noticed the same thing. My workshop was called "If I Know Now What I Knew Then," and it was the opportunity to go to Australia and say, you know what, you guys are following us, but my premise was that their evolution wouldn't take the 20 years that it had taken us. It
Yeah.
would take them probably 5 years or less because they had the benefit of the rest of the world kind of or the United States and the market leading them, but it also just was going faster for a lot of different reasons. So I had the same experience. Michelle, go ahead, your floor.
it's fine. It's hard on Zoom to know, like the talking over. It's hard on Zoom, so no worries. Okay, so I feel like it's hard to know what to go, what direction to go at this point because Tom, I know you have a million stories, and I feel like we could do an
Yeah.
entire podcast just with Tom stories and only like catch the very
Yeah.
tip of the iceberg of Tom stories. But I guess before we dip into those, at what point did you realize, I guess, how long were you doing the large loss stuff with these companies? And at what point did you realize maybe there could be some training here? Maybe I should think about starting a training school to teach people how to do this. Maybe this is going to be needed. And so then when did you found large loss mastery and start making that shift?
Well, I didn't make that shift until 2016.
Okay.
Or 15 is when I started to write the manual for the class, and so the first class. And but my go back to the 80s and 90s. The rest when you were in restoration, you were full service.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is you did everything. So you did electronics. You had a crew that did electronics. You had a crew that did documents. You did it all in house. There were no, you didn't sub anything out except for generators and fuel. And so
Hmm.
we did. So I grew up in the industry after I went from scrubbing the wall. Um, they taught me how to do electronic restoration. So we're taking apart computers and stuff. And so for the first the first 4 years of my career, that's what I did was electronic restoration. Then I got more into the structure, but I was always kind of doing a little bit of everything. And so So been in structure restoration, been in document recovery restoration, been in um, shoot, electronics, documents, structure, pretty much everything that you can imagine in restoration. I physically have done and was a part of. And so that was very valuable, in flash forward to the future, because I have experience in all those areas. So I know when we go on projects, I know what the process should be to a certain degree. And so um, probably my biggest thing in getting into the training part, because after MF Bank, we went into Munters, and so that's when I was hired by Mickey Lee at Munters in 1994, and Mickey and I have worked together ever since. We're still very good friends. He's a mentor and a dear friend of mine, and he's retired now, but he still will do my little 2 hour slot that I have for him in my in my classes, because he can just zoom in, zoom out, and
Mm.
and so we went through my career with Munters, and it was my another one of my mentors, Lauren Reed, who was the vice president of Munters here in the U.S. Left Munters and went to um, PureClean, and so I spent 2 years at PureClean in their large loss division, bringing that to life. And then I decided to go out on my own in 2012. And the independent road is interesting. The highs are high, the lows are low. And then it was Lauren that he said, Tom, you need to take what you know and put it into a class, and start to, because I look at myself as part trainer, part mentor, and part historian. And I didn't look at myself that way until the last couple of years, when I started to realize that most of the people in this room weren't even born when I'm talking about some of the stuff that we've done in the past.
Mm.
Me, which projects for me seem like they happened yesterday, but they didn't. And so then I started had
Right.
to look at everything I have to give people a little bit of the history of where we came from, why we do that, where did lay flat come from, all of these things that we were involved with, throughout our career, and all my mentors, and when I say we, I'm really talking about everybody that has helped me throughout my career, because that's what I am, is I'm them. And I always have a hard time saying me or I. That's not something, because that's it would not have happened. Astro would not have
Mm.
happened if there was not somebody that had inspired me. And so Lauren said, "You take it from here, Tom, and put it down." And so I did that. And unfortunately, he died 6 days before I did my first class in New
Mm.
Orleans. And that was tough. That was tough, because he didn't even get to see the end result of what he had inspired me to do. And
Mm.
so I got through that class. It was very rough. I was an emotional mess. I literally went from carrying his casket to the grave in Chicago to landing in New Orleans and going, all right, what are we, what are we,
Mm.
what are we doing? But the class in New Orleans was awesome. Everybody there was great, and then from there, it grew into where we are now. Now I have 4 classes: project management class, technician class, um, estimating class, and a business development class. And then a new class that we're adding in is our CAD operations class.
Mm.
All of our classes revolve around management, revolve around the actual management of the job. So we don't focus on drying and pulling carpet or cutting walls or any of that. There's enough training on that. And to be perfectly honest, where the guys need the most training is in the management, because
Yep.
documentation, invoicing, those are the places that we have the biggest problems on our jobs. And so that's what I focus on: is what do the attendees need, and what can they use? What kind of takeaways can we give them to where when they leave that class, they can literally take everything that we talked about, everything that we did, and put it to work. And that's where Astro comes from. Astro behind Michelle
Mm.
is our award that we give to the winning team, because everything that we do teach in our classes goes into motion and goes into an exercise where you will compete against everybody else in the class, and the winner goes home with Astro as best in class. And so that's really our main focus is uh, the management of projects from estimating to invoicing. And so I have a blast with it, and I also do consulting with mostly mid-level restoration companies that have never done large loss before. They call me up, and I can help them through the estimating process, the scoping process, the contract, and then I can also, if I'm available, I can also come out into the field and run their project with them. And so I can guide them through everything from start to finish also.
So one of the things I love that you do, so you do simulated losses, and you've done them one of the most recent one I believe was the Sphere in Vegas.
Mhm.
You've done them at NASA. You've done them in big stadium. So what's the coolest place you've simulated a dry out? And do you just kind of give a theory of here's what it looks like and here's what's impacted, or do you create some sort of a photo or some sort of a document that people get to like get their minds around?
I create the case studies, and what I do is I put together, and they're always a fire and water case study mixed in with
Mm.
some temporary climate control. Um, and what I will do, if they're not projects that I've actually done, like with when we were at the Superdome with Munters, um, back during Katrina, if they're not projects that we were actually part of, then I look at, I'm a visual person, and I like to, wherever I go, I have this little thing in my head that is always looking around saying, all right, what if, how much, and how long? I'm asking myself, what if it was a fire? How much would it cost, and how long would it take? And I do this everywhere. And then it also turns into efficiencies, because then I'll be like in a restaurant, like over the weekend, watching football, and I'll be like, well, they could be doing this differently if they did that. If they close that door, move that door over there, it'd work better. What? Why don't they do that? And so I create the case study, and fire water. Um, Sometimes we'll throw in some mold. Um, the Sphere was probably the coolest one. I'm partial to Kennedy Space Center. Um, that's right here because I've been going out there forever, and we've done a lot of projects out there with them, with Kennedy, with NASA, for over the decades. Um, but the Sphere was probably the wildest, because it's, when you first look at it, you're just going, man, that's that would be impossible. And some of the attendees will do that too in the class. So that, man, you can't get a crane in there. You can't do all that. But it's built. I tell them, if they built it, you can clean it. Just find out how they built it. And so when we dug into how, and they got out pictures and showed them how they built it, all of a sudden it's not impossible. All of a sudden it's like, because number one, there's a lot of optics on the inside that they're going to have to replace and do a lot of stuff. So they have the mechanisms built to do all of that. Also, number two, it is built so that they can bring a crane in, and the same crane they built it with can actually go inside of it right now.
Hmm.
And then there's different platforms and things that you can do. But that's an extreme job, which would just be it'd be a monster. But the way I look at it, I anything is possible, because I was in New York City in 1987, and MTV had a fire. And we're working. So for the first 2 years of my career, I was in and out of New York City. So I spent a lot of time in New York. Had never been there before. I was just a small town kid, and I was blown away with New York. It's just so energetic and so much going on. And we were doing a fire for MTV. And MTV back in the 80s was like the place. I mean, and it was unbelievable. Kiss would be there one day, Aerosmith would be there another, Madonna, Duran Duran, all of these bands that were real popular back then were all there in the building. And on everybody's desk they had the little spaceman, which is also an inspiration for Astro. And so we were doing that fire, and then we got another fire loss downtown. And so I started going downtown, and then another one over at Brooklyn. And so one day we were down at the World Trade Center, and this is where the what if, how much, and how long was born. So this is, has been carried with me for a very long time. And so I was standing there, and we were looking up, and we looked up at the World Trade Center, and I was with a buddy of mine. I said, man, what if this was a job? Wouldn't this be like the incredible job? And 7 years later, we were there, and we did that job in 1993 after the first attack on the World Trade Centers. And it was a restoration dream, where it was just light soot, 220 floors, 8.8 million square feet. It's still one of the largest projects ever done. Not the largest dollar amount, but the largest square footage amount. If it was done today, God only knows how much it would cost. 8.8 million square feet. There's not that many buildings on Earth right now that are bigger than that. And so, so that's kind of where most of my philosophies have come from, and turned them into the training. When Lauren said, hey, you got to take it from here and put it here. And so, but I'm always evolving with it too, based on the people that I meet, the attendees, the restorers, the awesome, restoration, industry people that I come across. And so I'm always evolving the class into something that I haven't done yet. And so sometimes looking at those case studies, I'm picking buildings that I want to do that I never did. And so I would love to do the Sphere. I would get on a plane right now and go. Another good one was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I like that was a good case study. That was fun.
A lot of content in that one.
Probably. So yeah. So I'd probably like to dig into what you do differently, but I think that we'll kind of shorten this up a little bit and not get too long, because I think that's interesting. But one of the things that I've noticed, at least I hear complaints a lot of times from restorers, is the role of consultants who come in. They're not experts on the project. They're only experts on what we get paid. How do you advise restorers to deal with that? And to what level do you just say, okay, well, I'd like to get something out of this job and not fight this for the next year to win my case on principle? What is your strategy or thoughts on that? And am I right? Is that one of the bigger challenges? Or is there something else that's lurking out there that surprises people?
Well, it is, dealing with third-party consultants is is a challenge. And I am a third party consultant. I'm an independent consultant. And so
Mm.
I don't do as I do mine kind of on an individual basis, but I do get files, you know, from my friends that are in some of the well-known uh, with some of the well-known companies in the third party, and they'll say, Tom, take a look at it. We just want to get your what you think, and I'll do that. And I'll look through it. My biggest my I'll give a shameless plug, but one of my things that I would recommend to restorers is if you want to learn how to deal with these issues and how to avoid the red flags, come to one of my classes, come to my elite course or even to any of the courses, even the business development course, because my 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 what I give away at the class is literally everything that we've ever done. You get the documents, you get the templates, you get everything. And so, because I believe in walking the walk and talking the talk. And so we give away all those takeaways so that there's plenty. Um, but to, but in general, my rule is, and I'm a negotiator. I'm not one of those guys that's going to tell you that you got to fight about everything. Because my father taught me a long time ago. You know, he died young at 65, and he always had this saying. He said, "It's a small matter in a big world, Thomas." And
Mm.
and that's how I look at these things.
Mm-hmm.
Some guys are looking at them like, oh, they're and then I'll look at their invoice and I say, well, they have you gave them this deal. But there are things that you can do in your invoicing practice where you're including things and you're not padding the invoice or nothing like that. You're not doing anything illegal that are negotiating points. And you want to have them in there to negotiate with. So when somebody does come on the job and you know they're going to scrutinize your bill, you know they're going to find something in your invoice. It might not be anything that you did wrong. It 9 times out of 10, it's a formula that wasn't working in a spreadsheet.
Mm.
It's a mathematical error, or 9 times out of 10, it's missing timesheets, it's missing crew sheets, it's missing equipment sheets, it's missing all of the documentation because there's a saying that we've been using for decades. If you don't document it, it didn't happen.
Mm.
And it's very, very important that, all right, if you're traveling, where's your receipts for the hotel? Where's the proof that this person was even in that hotel room? All of these things you need to do, and you need to know that you need to do them. And then also periodic invoicing. So get money up front, ask for money up front, provide an invoice for that money that you're asking for. And then if you're on a 3-week project, we want to give them 3 invoices. Don't wait until the end of the job to give them your invoice. And for God's sakes, don't wait 30 days to prepare your final invoice. Because what'd you do? You just added 30 days to your pay cycle.
Yep.
And so if they were going to pay you in 60, now you're getting paid in 90. If they were going to pay you in 90, now it's 120. So invoice once a week. And then that way everybody can see, all right, so here's the gaps. If you wait until you're just producing this invoice at the end and you have gaps in it, you have red flags in it, they're only going to find them on that final invoice. And if you wait 30 days, now you added 30 days, but now you probably added another 30 days because it has red flags in it that you would have seen had you periodically invoiced. They would have shown themselves and you would have made that correction. So by the time you got to that final invoice, it's good. And because back when I first started in this industry, well, 80s to the early 90s, we used to put our final invoice together and fly to Minneapolis, fly to Chicago, wherever the headquarters was, sit down with them, go through the 3-ring binder, spend about a day, 2 days, 3 days, boom, boom, and we leave with a check. And, that might happen today, but I doubt it happens very often. But we just live in a different world now. So but we have to recognize the world that we live in, and the world that we live in has changed. I have to live in it. I've been in it so long, and I refuse to become that get off my lawn guy. I don't want to be that guy. And so I love technology. I love everything that we have, all the tools that we have today for documentation. We're surrounded by software that can do the documentation for us. But what is the number one thing that we've had issues with is finding time to do paperwork, to do entries. And it's been that way since the very beginning. Tom, man, we're working 18 hours a day. The dog ate my homework. There's all of these excuses why you don't want to do your documentation. But it's the number one thing. And also labor is the number one red flag on projects. And in my class, we talk a lot about production rates and what you should expect out of your labor. And that's the number one place that everybody starts. And so in our classes, I teach all of this because when you come out of the class, you have a whole different way of looking at the job. Because I want you to come through the class and start thinking about, okay, what did we produce on that job? Why were we producing at such a low rate on that job? What was the reason versus this project? Instead of doing things on it is what it is basis. And so where guys will do projects and they won't know what it is until they've produced their invoice. And they don't know that they did. And then they'll look at the end of the year and they go, well, why didn't we make any money? We invoiced, we did all this stuff. Our top line was great, but their performance affects their bottom line. And they won't see it until it's too late if they're not looking for it. And so my job is to show them what to look for. What are the red flags? What are the things that you need to do on your projects so that number one, you can get paid. Number two, you can negotiate if you have that, that project where you're just going to get beat up. Be ready to negotiate on it. Give, because 9 times out of 10, if you negotiate and you're doing a really good job for consultants, they're going to remember you because. I've been called by consultants and say, hey, Tom, do you got a good restoration company in Miami? And I say, yeah, I got somebody and you can send them over, and so when you do a good job, people remember it. And it's probably the best marketing that you can do is a good job. And a good job means you're doing it, you're estimating it right, you're scoping it right, you're performing it right, and you're invoicing it right. Because you can do a great job and have a horrible invoice, and all of a sudden it becomes what I call the disaster after the disaster. And because everybody forgets that, man, there was 5 feet of water in here, 5 weeks ago. They forget all about that. All that's left is your invoice. They forget about all that great work that you did. It all goes away. All that's left is your invoice on the table, or if it's not a good invoice, it's somewhere over there.
Somewhere over there.
Yeah,
Okay.
they don't want to look at it.
Tom, share a story before we wrap it up. I mean, you've been everywhere. I know I've heard a Kuwait story, and you said Singapore, New York City, and then you've worked during Katrina, and and you have all these trainings that you do, and so share a story. I don't even know where to lead you in sharing a story because I know you have many. So go ahead and pick one.
Well, I'm going to try and pick one here. I've got several that are running through my head right now. The World Trade Center was one of those jobs that I always tell people in the class. I wish I had a little jar that I could open up and just let it out, and you could get the goosebumps with me on that project. that was probably, one of well, it is the highlight of my career, as it was for everybody that was involved with that project. We all still talk about it. And the beautiful thing about that job was it was just amazing. I mean, think about 8.8 million square feet in 16 days. And so it wasn't like we were on this job for 6 months. There were parts
How many
of it.
people?
We were averaging just under 4,000 a day.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The logistics alone.
Yes. Well, what we had to do, and this is where Nick, rest his soul, from John Donne, helped us out. He bought every dry sponge in America, probably the world at the time, and so we weren't a big company. We were about maybe 10 million. And at that time, that was a large restoration company.
Yeah.
And we filled up the lobby with $1 million worth of supplies, and it was a sight to behold. It was unbelievable. It was like a supply warehouse. And we had to scrape to do that, and then we had to scrape to find supervisors to manage, because we got paid to manage the loss. And so what would happen, all the labor was supplied by the three companies that supplied everyday labor in the building. And so all that was a direct bill. So our portion that we got was the management piece of it. And so we had to find supervisors, and the only way to do that then was to basically, if you had a mom, a dad, a sister, a brother, an uncle, a friend that was unemployed, all of a sudden, you were in New York City, and you were a supervisor at the World Trade Center. And so,
wow.
Yeah, but we were very fortunate because everybody was very patriotic and they worked really hard. And because it was, you just felt very patriotic working on this project. It was like, wow, this is like, we're bringing back the World Trade Center and everything. And the governor of New York was there. It was like, it was a really big deal. And I was 26 years old, so this was a incredible highlight. We did come back after 9/11. We had some buildings that were around ground zero, and it was just really sad because I would look out, and we were actually in a building where we had our big celebration after we accomplished after the first 16 days. And because most of the crew was going home, and then I stayed on with the crew and did the Vista Hotel that was there with the World Trade Centers, and it was just an incredible experience. But looking down at ground zero from that exact same ballroom at the top of, I can't remember which building it was. I think it was on, I don't want to say Church Street maybe, but in looking down, it was just horrible, and the dust and everything in the air, and that's really what we were doing a lot of filtration back then. But going back to when we did the World Trade Center in '93, there was a portion of it where we stayed at the Downtown Athletic Club, and this will be my story for you. And so we were at the Downtown Athletic Club, but right now I think they turned it into high-end condos. Back then it was a low-end hotel, and so it was. I think we were paying $80 a night, to stay, and it was pretty rundown. But the cool thing was the bar downstairs, and if you know anything about the Downtown Athletic Club, it used to be where they had the Heisman Trophy ceremony.
Oh.
Real big deal. And so they had all the Heisman trophies around and stuff. It was really cool. The rest of the place was kind of dumpy, but it had a gym at the top of it. And in the gym, JFK Jr. used to come and work out. Every other day he would ride his bike down, and you would see him up in the gym. And he's just a really cool guy. And if you ever seen Seinfeld when she was at the gym, when Elaine was at the gym, and
Yep.
that's when they did that, I was like, that happened. I was on the treadmill right beside JFK Jr. But I had this room. And so our rooms all looked out right over Battery Park, the lower part of Battery Park, and the Statue of Liberty. And the 4th of July rolled around, and this was my best 4th of July. And I had this room where you could open the window up and you could go out onto the roof. We were up about 50 stories or so. And so we had this hibachi. So we had a hibachi and a cooler full of beer. And they rolled like 8 barges in front of the statue, from the Statue of Liberty down to river, because we're getting ready for the fireworks. And you'd look down and there were just millions of people. And it's like, man, thank God we're not down there. Give me another beer. and
Right.
So we were cooking, and then the fireworks started, and it was just this. We were covered in gunpowder. It was just the most amazing fireworks. I mean, they were just all like right here. It was just like, oh my God, here I was 26 years old. I'm like, I'm the luckiest guy on the planet, and because I'd already been to Singapore, with a project in Singapore, and then right after the World Trade Center is when I went to Kuwait. So my first 10 years in this business, I grew up with no blinders. It was like, okay, boom, and so I always try to teach everybody, don't get put in a box. Make sure you keep the blinders off, because this business will take you all over the world if you want it to. And the world might not be the globe to you, but the world to an individual restorer might be all over the state of Florida, or all over California, or all over just one city. Whatever your world is, it can take you there. But pay attention, listen to your mentors, your trainers, and your historians, because don't make the same mistakes that we did. And we could write a book on all the things we did wrong. But that's where you learn how to do the things right, is sometimes you end up doing things wrong.
Right.
Or spraying chemicals that don't exist anymore, or they do. You might have to get them in Mexico or something.
Yes. Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you. Phil, go ahead, and any final words?
Just a final thought. What was really cool hearing about that story, and I actually could put myself there, it just was amazing, is you didn't have one of these at the time, and so it's here. And it's in 3D, and you didn't spend your time looking at a little screen trying to make sure you captured the moment. You captured the moment, and that's kind of cool. Maybe that's a perspective for today's generation, of saying, be present and enjoy where you are.
Yeah, we didn't even have pagers.
Oh, no.
There were I didn't get my first cell phone until 1994. And so it was a totally different world. And I wish I had this device, because I would have a lot more pictures than I do. And but we were still 35 millimeter taken and haven't developed. And, we didn't document projects the way we do now.
No,
I'm sure not. So, Tom, great discussion. There's so much information you gave there, and things that restorers can just take and put in their pocket and use them on that next big project coming up. The resource of large loss mastery is something that people should take a look at, and it's evidenced by your stories here, and just talking about how you can support. doing large losses, making profits on those jobs, but also creating successful projects and creating a successful company in this process by utilizing those tools and resources. And so I don't know if it was just a quick follow-up, but where do they find you?
Well, you can find me, you can email me at tom@largelossmastery.com, or you can go to largelossmastery.com and you'll find us there also. And you can also, we have our estimating software, The Edge, which is also, you can find that at largelossmastery.com and theedgv3.com. So.
Perfect. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This was so fun. And Tom, it's always a pleasure catching up with you as well. So look forward to crossing paths with both of you at some shows pretty soon. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Likewise. Thank
you
you
very much, Michelle. Thank you.